Marvel Snap's new Team Clash mode, which releases in about a week, reimagines the entire game as a clash between multiple factions, but I think it might already be broken. The game mode breaks Marvel Snap down into teams: Avengers, X-Men, Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Verse, and Thunderbolts. There are 6 new cards for each team, and there are also cards outside of the 6 new cards that are part of the teams as well. Each time you play a team deck, for example, each of the cards on that team will get an additional bonus. For the Avengers, after you play an Avenger at a location, give another Avenger at that location +1 power. For the X-Men, you get +1 energy for each location in which you have 3 or more X-Men. For Thunderbolts, they reveal with 2 additional power when you play them at locations that you're losing. Guardians of the Galaxy have a special glowing location that gives the Guardians additional power when you play there. And Spider-Verse gives you +2 energy when one of your Spider-Verse cards moved last turn. Now, that's kind of the one I wanted to talk about. We're going to start here and then review all the cards because, to me, a lot of these abilities look pretty tame, pretty limited, pretty straightforward. Oh, here's a little bit of a small bonus. And then you look at the Spider-Verse one, and the Spider-Verse one looks mega messed up. Now, we're going to take a look at each of the individual cards, and it's possible that balance is a factor here. But from what I can tell, there are going to be cards that are outside of the 6 new cards that are going to be includable in these decks and receive these bonuses. Like, for example, Iceman is an X-Man and will count towards the 3 X-Men at the requirement, as I understand it. Not like specifically that I know Iceman is, but we can be reasonably smart about this, right? Which makes me really worried about Spider-Verse because of cards like Silk and Ezekiel Sims that are repeatable, movable cards. My understanding is that when this stuff says Spider-Verse cards move, it refers to any card that's a Spider-Verse card and not just the ones that are part of the 6 core members of the team. Which means either those cards are not Spider-Verse cards, or this is a super messed up mechanic. Full stop, when I look at these mechanics, 4 of them are adding 6 to 10 power to a normal deck. This one is adding 6 to 10 energy. That is just drastically more valuable. But let's start with the cards. Each of the 6 core members of the team have been reimagined with new team-centric abilities. Captain America at 3/4, giving your Avengers at this location +2 power. This just looks like a very solid card on rate. Effectively, imagine if Captain America just hit your entire deck. That's what this card is going to play like. Very solid. You're looking at just like a 3/10 basically every game, not even counting into the passive here. Just if your whole deck is Avengers, this is a 3/10. Doctor Strange, an on-reveal that moves another Avenger with an on-reveal ability to his location to repeat it. This is one of the cheaper on-reveal repeaters we've had, but I do think that this is a card that's tough to evaluate in a vacuum. We know it affects Avengers. We don't know who is classified as an Avenger. I think this is the one where it's the hardest for me to make guesses as to what the team will consist of. Where I can reasonably look at Silk and be like, yeah, that's a Spider-Verse card. I can look at Ezekiel Sims and be like, yeah, that's a Spider-Verse card. Everyone's been an Avenger, so this card could range from pretty mediocre to really legitimately strong. My instinct is that this is one of the weaker cards in this group, but if the Avengers are to reach the heights that might be required of them, I think that this could be an important piece of it. It's going to either be the worst Avenger or the best Avenger. Hawkeye, on reveal, if you play a card here next turn, +2 power. If it is an Avenger, repeat this ability here. I mean, if Kitty Pryde is an Avenger, and God knows what she actually is, I would guess an X-Men, but again, everyone has been an Avenger. This is kind of a nice thing to do. Otherwise, it just looks more like, a 1/7 than it does the greatest card of all time. but I do think this is like a solid one drop. A lot of what you're seeing in these decks is these new cards for the game mode are pretty much almost entirely strict upgrades over the baseline cards. Like, this is like what Hawkeye would look like if it was a Series 5. Basically, Captain America, that's what it would look like if it was a Series 5. Doctor Strange, that's what it might look like if it was a Series 5. And yes, there's these like Avengers tie-ins, but mostly what this game mode looks like it's doing is reimagining these cheap and like easy to acquire cards as if they were extremely powerful and extremely rare, which is a really good space to be in. Hulk at 6'11" on reveal, +2 power for every other Avenger you have here. I think this is a little bit worse than you might think because this is typically a card that you're going to want to play later in the game to win its own lane. It's almost like they added a bit of an Iron Man dynamic to this card. This is a card that I strongly suspect will not be a great card as far as Avengers go. A lot of the other stuff is just going to be more efficient. You look at like effectively the 310 Captain America. This guy costs 6. He's going to be bigger, but he's not going to be that much bigger, right? Like, it's almost the same ability as the Captain America, and all you're really getting for the difference in energy cost is 6 or 7 more power. And it's like, okay, I'm not really seeing this one. For the Hulk, I think he could stand to be a little bit larger. Vision 4/7, if you have another Avenger here, you can move this. I mean, this is just making Vision a little bit cheaper. Again, not a particularly exciting card. It's a good card, but it's not the most exciting thing anyone's ever seen. It's just Vision, but he's a 4/7 because you're probably going to have an Avenger at every location, so you probably just have a 4/7 Vision. Cool. I mean, it's not like it's a bad card. It's a good card. But when you look at like some of the souped up versions of the other cards, this is one of the less exciting ones. Thor, 3/3 on reveal, draw an Avenger, then shuffle Mjolnir into your deck. It's pretty good. Like, this is definitely just going to say draw a card, then shuffle Mjolnir into your deck. That's an upgrade over what base Thor is, but it's a little bit, it's more of a glue guy card than it is like, wow, this is the thing I'm building my deck around. It's just, oh, this is nice. Is Beta Ray Bill an Avenger, or is he a Guardian of the Galaxy? I genuinely, fully would not be able to parse this one. We won't know until the game mode actually comes out. What's the deal with that, though? This looks so much more like it's an attempt to make Thor a generic card than it is to make the Avengers deck a Thor deck, which I think is pretty interesting, but I worry that it underestimates just how bad bricking a draw is. Like, yeah, you get the draw effectively off of Thor's on reveal, but it's still not good to brick that draw, and I do wonder if that will cost this card in the long run. Moving on to Cyclops ongoing, gains power equal to the most energy you had in one turn this game. So baseline like a 3/7, but realistically with what the X-Men team is doing, maybe closer to like a 3/10, maybe bigger, depending on what you can really build into with this kind of game mode. Like, X-Men is a really interesting team because I see them as having a lot of ways to get a lot of energy, but not a lot of ways to convert that energy into power. And again, that sort of depends on like what access they end up getting to other big stuff. But one of the things that was really apparent for me when doing research for this video and trying to sort of guess at like who's in what team is a lot of the bigger guys in Marvel Snap are not members of teams. They're like villains or just things like the Infinite or like just not really members of any kind of heroic team organization, which most of these are. Like, a lot of the biggest guys, the guys you would use for a lot of energy, you would use your energy on, are just not members of these teams. And so I don't know what tolerance the game mode is going to have for going outside of your team, but I'd imagine that X-Men has probably the least tolerance for doing that because it needs so many members of the team in order to even start getting the bonus. There's no real way to half-ass X-Men. And so when I look at Cyclops, I see an attempt at like converting energy into power literally, right? Sunspot seems like a card that, you know, X-Men, probably going to be an X-Man. Yes, he's been member of like AIM or whatever, like a bunch of stuff, right? But this is a deck that I think will struggle converting its energy into power within its own class, and also has a lot being asked of it in terms of you need to stay within the class. So this is a card, Cyclops, that I think is going to be quite important to how most of these decks play out because it naturally converts the energy into power. Jean Grey, the next time you get bonus energy as the turn starts, draw a card. This effectively is just 2/3 draw a card. Glue Girl here, Marvel Girl, if you will. A+, nothing bad to say about this. You definitely care about card volume with X-Men because when you are having a bunch of energy, it's really important that you have stuff to do with that energy. So getting that kind of additional volume is really good. 2/3 that counts as an X-Man and draws you a card at some point in the game. You are extremely happy with that. Nightcrawler, you can move this once. When it moves, give it +1 power for each of the X-Men at the new location. Another glue guy kind of card, but Nightcrawler is pretty important because it wants to be, the team passive is you get energy for when you have 3 X-Men at a location. The obvious downside for having 3 X-Men at a location is that you are then unable to commit a lot more points to that location. Nightcrawler just being able to move solves for that. Like, I think that even without the ability, Nightcrawler ends up probably an important part of these decks. Professor X, 5/5, you get +1 energy each turn for all of your X-Men at his location. To me, this guy is the build around in the X-Men archetype. Like, what you want to do is get 3 X-Men in a location so you can play him on 4 and then have way too much energy on the next turn. This is another reason why Nightcrawler is important, right? Because if you get him into a location where there are 3 other X-Men, not only are you getting the bonus for having 3 X-Men, you are also getting an additional 4 energy. So if you do that by turn 5, you get that on 6. What you're getting is effectively 10 energy on turn 6, and God knows what you're going to do with that, but it's going to be a lot of stuff. Your Cyclops is going to be really big. All of that stuff that we're talking about, right? I do wonder if this deck struggles with using that energy, because when I was looking for payoffs, like I said, a lot of the things you'd want to do here are villains. She-Hulk, definitely not an X-Man, right? Like, we're pretty sure about that one. So what is an X-Man that would fit in here? And I think that's a really interesting question as to like what the top end of a deck like this looks like. I really don't know, but it is interesting to me. Last up is Wolverine, who I think is mostly going to be functioning as like a combination Nightcrawler and Scalar. What you want to do with this Wolverine, which will destroy itself if you have unspent energy and regenerate with +2 power at a location where you have an X-Man, is get him out of a location where you have used him to like get a Professor X trigger, right? You want to like free up space in the location. But I don't think it says at another location where you have an X-Man. It says at a location where you have an X-Man, which means he might not actually free up the space at a location. This guy feels like a disappointment. Not that he's necessarily a bad card, but that what I would want him to do when playing the deck, I think is not going to be what he actually does. On to the Thunderbolts, who get additional power when you play them at locations that you're losing, starting with Ghost, 3/6, cost 1 less. For every location you're losing, just a classic good stats, good vibes kind of card here. I think Thunderbolts is maybe the most interesting of these classes for me because, again, it doesn't seem like deck building is going to be very tech heavy. You're locked into playing all 6 of these cards in any time you try to make a custom deck. And a lot of the time, especially with something like X-Men, you're going to want to add other cards within your class. So I'm not sure how much there's going to be anyone able to make like a tech deck. But I will say, this is my guess, if there is a tech deck available, it is in the Thunderbolts class, which is full of these like cards you play at locations you're losing that are really cheap and really big and really good pair with tech kind of stuff. And I think that that is what attracts me to the Thunderbolts is like, imagine if, I don't like this analogy might not track for a lot of people, but it's like if a whole class was a Sarah deck. You know how I talk about how hammer decks tend to play like Sarah decks, the Thor decks, because effectively what they're doing is playing some tech and then a 0/6 and a 0/6 and that kind of stuff. And they're using the 0/6s to supplement the tech gameplay. That's sort of what I see a lot of the Thunderbolts cards as. So I think that in addition, it doesn't need as much, like the passive is just stacking bonus power rather than something that scales with itself. So I think this is probably the passive that asks the least of you in deck building and gives you the most space to be a tech deck, which is largely to say a lot of things are pushing me towards the idea of Thunderbolts being a tech-based deck. Sentry adds his void only to locations where you don't have a Thunderbolt. So in other words, this is just a 4/9 if you want it to just be a 4/9. You have full control over whether or not this card is what it is. You can also get the void if you want it, if you want to be losing that location. I don't think that's going to come up a lot. If I had to guess, mostly what you're doing with this card is playing him as a 4/9 because you have Thunderbolts at all the locations. Taskmaster gains power equal to your highest power Thunderbolt. Now, there aren't a lot of like really big giant Thunderbolts running around here. There's ways to buff your Thunderbolts, obviously. Like if you play a Taskmaster at a location, or if you play a Sentry at a location you're losing, it's a 4/11, right? This guy's weird though, because on reveal, you'd think would override the 2 power gained from the passive. And I really hope it doesn't work that way, but that's how Taskmaster works most of the time, right? Like it's like but they changed it up, right? Like it is different. It says gains power, so it works like Dracula now. So it'll still get the passive, but it's just a weird change from how Taskmaster is that like sort of trips me up instinctively when I look at this card. But yeah, this is probably going to be, you know, a 4/11, a 4/13. You're happy with that. That's a really good thing to be. Toxidoxy on reveal, give 2 characters in your hand plus 2 power. You can't play them next turn unless they're Thunderbolts. This is the one card in the entire like class really that is saying you should play a lot of Thunderbolts in your Thunderbolts deck. The rest of these cards are just like, yeah, we're pretty good. You're gonna do something with us. Like Taskmaster is kind of testing you to play Thunderbolts, but not really because Sentry is already built in. This is a card that's like, I will hurt you if you don't play Thunderbolts. It's interesting though, because like I am fairly certain that if there's no downside on this card, it's just way better Gwenpool. Like 2/2 doing this twice seems really good. I think this is a very solid card. I think it is likely a very powerful card. I think it does a lot of really strong stuff. I think they might have got a little lost in the sauce with Valentina to -1. And like, I get it, right? What you're doing here is you're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 2 -1. So I'm losing this location. I can get the Thunderbolt passive. I get it. I don't think it's worth having a -1 body here. Like, what I also wonder is, like, can this be an Annihilus deck? I'd be willing to bet Thunderbolt's not an Annihilus kind of guy, right? Like, Annihilus not really a member of this team. But you could play outside of the team just to get Annihilus in here. That way you could do, like, really cool Sentry stuff. Imagine playing this and then Sentrying, like, the mid lane, only playing on the mid lane or whatever, Sentrying the other 2 locations or something. Like, is that possible? Does it say, like, will Sentry add to every location where you don't have a Thunderbolt or just to one where you don't have a Thunderbolt? Is there a way to make this good? I don't know, but I think this one's a little lost in the sauce unless you build around it. Like, yo, it's cool that you get a Thunderbolt and it costs 1 less and that you get to, like, have this place where you can activate your passive over and over. I don't know if it does enough for me. Last up is Winter Soldier. This and Ghost are really what pushed me towards believing this is basically like a Sarah Tech deck. This and Ghost, you're losing 2 locations and like some tech cards just seems like a really powerful thing to do on the final turn of the game. A 7, a 6, and a Shang-Chi or whatever, right? Like that just seems like a strong thing to do in a game mode like this. That's generally where my head is at for this kind of thing. Like this guy, of course, 1/7, you can only play him at locations that you're losing. That's just, like, honestly, I'm not saying they should make this real card because I don't think it's a good dynamic to promote in the real game of Marvel Snap. Thunderbolts is the one that I think is pushing up the most against play skill and caring a lot about priority, because it's really interesting the way, like, what this class is stressing. I think it's probably stressing things that aren't super fun for the majority of people that a lot of high-level players take for granted. And I really wonder how this one's gonna land. On to the Guardians, who probably have the worst passive, +1 power for playing at the glowing location. You know, that's cool, right? But if your opponent can see the glowing location, don't they just not play there? Anyway, Drax, 3/4 on reveal. If your opponent played a card here this turn, double its power. That's cool. I assume the way it works is if you hit on the glowing location, it'll get the +1 power and then it'll double. That's a 3/10. I just don't know if that's easier than, say, the 3/10 that Captain America represents in Avengers. Gamora, 5/7 on reveal. If your opponent played a card here, destroy their lowest cost card here. I actually think this one makes Gamora worse because a lot of late game Marvel Snap, the fact that I played cards early in the game is fine, right? Like, it's not the worst thing ever, but it does take options away later in the game. And I think that I'd rather just have Gamora's 5 power that she gets in a normal game than destroy something that is probably less than 5 power most of the time in a game mode like this, and also, like, prevents my opponent from playing multiple things there. My instinct is that this is actually just worse than normal Gamora. Groot is a 4/10 that discards a non-Guardian card from your hand unless your opponent played there this turn. You could avoid this by just playing all Guardians, and then it's just a 4/10. That's a good thing. This is just sick. This is a sick, awesome, cool card. The problem is if you do want to play outside of your class, he does end up having some pretty stringent requirements, but one of the good things about cheap big guys is you can just play them on the last turn of the game, and then they'll still be cheap and they'll still be big. So I think Groot is just good. I also think maybe you could do something like intentionally discarding things, right? Because this is also effectively targeted discard, yeah? So you have like, okay, maybe I play all Guardians except for Proxima Midnight, and then every time I play Groot, Proxima Midnight shows up. That seems pretty good too. Mantis 1/2 on reveal. If you hit where your opponent played, you get -2 cost and a Guardian card in your hand. This seems kind of sick, and it really strikes me that like this could be what Mantis just says in the real game. Like if you hit Mantis, -2 cost to something in your hand. I don't think that's the worst thing I've ever seen. They could just actually do that. I think in the context of this game mode, it makes her a little bit worse because it has to be a Guardians card. And like when I think about this card existing in the real game, I'm like, that's probably like a fine thing to happen. I wonder if that's like the kind of thing that they could do, but they wouldn't do as a generic, but they would do if they like had, they're clearly willing to do it as long as there's restrictions on it. I think that that's just kind of a thing they can do as a generic. And I am almost interested to say, like, this could be her actual real-life text. Star-Lord, the team captain here, 2/3. Give all of your Guardians 1 power if you get them. I mean, this guy's your final turn play, right? Like, your final turn play is Groot, Star-Lord. Just hit him with, like, 1,000,000 power. This is a class that I think really wants you to play full class in order to get full value out of this kind of stuff. This is a powerful ability. I just don't know if it scales high enough, but in a world where people are doing like pretty linear things instead of exponential things, I can see this being a really strong card. I think my worry for the Guardians as a whole is I think they probably have the weakest passive, and so their cards need to carry a lot of the weight, and I'm not sure they do. From the weakest passive to the strongest passive, Agony, of course, merges with a card. If it merges, move it away from here as long as that card is a Spider-Verse card. Whenever you move anything in Spider-Verse, you get 2 energy. This just says Agony, but you get 2 energy on it. Like, that's jacked up. Anti-Venom, set the cost and power of your top card to 0 until it moves. This just says Anti-Venom, but you get it all back for free. You don't even need to play Luke Cage or Shadow King or anything. You just get it back whenever you can make it move. Like, I think Spider-Verse, the thing that strikes me about this is I find it basically impossible to believe that cards like Madam Web and Silk and Sims are not part of the Spider-Verse class. Like, that just seems like it would be an insane miss to me for them to make a game mode like this and then do that, right? That and those cards specifically stick out to me as like, not only do they trivialize the whole thing that this deck is doing, they put the game mode at risk of this deck just point ceilinging everything else out of existence. It is a genuine worry of mine that like the cards here are very strong. The passive is kind of unbelievable if you're able to repeat moving. And just the card Madam Web makes everything in here incredibly free. Ghost Spider, thankfully, just not a very good card. The last card you played moves here. If it's a Spider-Verse card, it gets +2 power. That's just Ghost Spider. That's just normal Ghost Spider. Like, yeah, okay, you know, maybe we'll do like a Human Torch thing or whatever here. Maybe that's what we're going out of class for. And I think with Spider-Verse, largely the question is just like, what's the stupidest thing you can do with 8 extra energy? Like Man Spider. That's got to be a Spider-Verse card, right? Like, how could it not be? Again, like when I was doing research for this, one of the things that struck me is like the classes, the individual groups of 6 cards seem fairly well balanced. But from what we can tell, you're going to be able to play other cards that are going to be in the class. And those are like basically based on who the character is. And those don't seem like they're balanced in any real way because everything that has to do with move for the last 2 years has been related to a spider guy. So this whole thing is just moves and man spider, and all the cards that just do that, they just happen to say double on them. Like it worries me because every other passive is like, get like 4 power on your guys at this location. And this passive is like, get a trillion energy in the class that has multiple cards that double their power. And like that's really scary. Scarlet Spider adds a clone of itself to another location, then goes to the other location. Just a very solid 3-4 here. Nothing you can say that's bad about this. 3-8 across multiple locations, moves itself so it triggers your passive. All A+ stuff here. Spider-Man 2099, 5-8 on reveal for each time one of your cards has moved. Of course, you're going to be doing that a lot. Give +1 power to another one of your cards. Another card that I just look at and I'm like, okay, like Silk, Ezekiel Sims. All of this stuff seems super jacked up. Move is already a really good archetype. It's getting 6 to 10 to more free energy per game. Now it's getting a bunch of free power too. We're playing this. We're playing Silk. We're playing Ezekiel Sims. This is just Hydra Stomper. It's literally just if Hydra Stomper and Kahori had a baby, that's what this card is. Symbiote Spider-Man effectively just says draw a card, right? Like what it does is activate, merge a card into this, and then also goes and gets a card out of your deck. It's like, again, we talk about like the last one was Hydra Stomper and Kahori hooked up. This is if Symbiote Spider-Man hooked up with Jubilee. That's what's going on here. It's just really good. So I know it's too early, and I know I'm doing a lot of guesswork based on like who makes sense to be in these factions. But I'm very concerned about Spider-Verse. Every other passive is like, oh, I'm scaling a couple of points. I'm doing some nice points. And Spider-Verse is like, you're getting 10 energy this game. 10 energy, enjoy it. What up, though? Right? Like, that's really scary. Spider-Verse seems like the Black Panther of this game mode. If anything holds it back, I think it would largely be, it is probably a move deck, right? Like, those typically don't get a lot of play, but if you're ever trying to play this game at high levels, Spider-Verse seems really messed up. Like, to me, it is like Spider-Verse is going to be the best deck in this format, and then there is a pretty massive power gap as all of the decks that scale like either smaller amounts of energy with more ask, that's X-Men, or just some additional power. It just seems like it's way harder to get 1 energy out of X-Men than it is to get 2 energy out of Spider-Verse. To get 1 energy out of X-Men, I have to make a meaningful sacrifice. I have to like put 3 X-Men in the same location and get that energy. To get 2 energy out of Spider-Verse, I have to play Silk. And then like, that's it. That's what I do. And it's like, wait, hold on. And again, like I could be wrong about how they're including cards in these things, but we know from the season video that there are other cards in these classes. And I think with Spider-Verse, the thing that gets me is I don't see how it's possible for those cards not to be in Spider-Verse. You could talk me out of a lot of cards being in Avengers. I think it'd be very difficult to sell me on the idea that something like Silk or Ezekiel Sims is not a Spider-Verse card. You could try, but like, I just don't know if you can actually convince me of that. I suspect that Spider-Verse is going to be too strong. Maybe even if things like Silk, Sims, Man Spider are not part of it. All right, y'all. What do you think about Team Clash? As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.